it was an operation that we didn't enjoy doing. I'll put it that way. Well, yeah, that was some deal on the skunks. Now you had to really be careful with that. You could have that odor for a long time before you could kill it. And there's been a lot of skunks too over the years. Harry Hardy, he was a dairyman. Back then we had to test all the cows at least once a year for bangs, and they had to bleed them. He had Harry Hardy, I imagine he was about 35 cows, I imagine he had, maybe 40. And I went over that morning and started bleeding, and we just left them in the stanchion and bled them. I sometimes got in the trough to bleed them before I started the tail bleeding. Harry was holding that stack of tubes. It was hunted to the tray. We had bled about at least 15, maybe 20, and he had on his boots, and on the end of those troughs, a lot of times there's a lot of feed at the end, and this water had gotten to the feed, and it was real slick, and his feet slipped out from under him. He dropped that blood. Well, all of it was just about broken. So I told him, I said, Harry, don't worry about it. It's something that'll happen sometime, and we'll come back another time and do it. It's nothing to worry about. See, he was such a good man. He just took everything so tough, but it worked out. Well, we had a lot of prolapse bladders in cows, and we didn't have to operate too much, but that was a tough deal. When so much would be out, something like that. You'd have to get there and try to drain the bladder, get the swelling down. Some of the times we'd have to, they didn't have a chute. We just had to put it to a tree or a post or something like that to keep it from raining too much. And that didn't do much good. I was afraid to give any shots to lay down, it'd rupture. We had a time on that, several of them on that deal. It wasn't easy back then. I remember Jeff Hill. He had swine ear syphilis. That's bad stuff. That was when the hogs were having trouble with it. And he was a mail carrier in Warm Springs. And they had him on sulfathazole for that ear syphilis. And that's the same time that penicillin came out. I had ear syphilis on my arm posting a hog at Auburn. And penicillin came along, I was on that sulfathazole. I told them, I said, you got penicillin now, can you give me some penicillin? And they said, yes, we will. They gave me 2 shots, and it cleared it right up. And Jeff Hill, sometime later on, he got ear syphilis. And they were treating him the same, I don't know what they were doing to him. But anyway, I told him, I said, go to the hospital and your doctor and get a shot of that penicillin. I think he went to them, and in about 3 or 4 days' time, he was doing all right after that penicillin. It was a wonderful drug back then. It was the only thing that did touch that swine ear syphilis. His arm was just almost black. And mine was too at Auburn, same way. I ought to tell you about the hogs down at Box Springs. Sam Faircloth, they had, I don't know, several hundred hogs that they were feeding out. And they were but getting scraps from Fort Benning. He had a load of hogs on a truck. I'd say about 25 good-sized hogs on his truck, ready to go to Macon to be slaughtered. He pulled up there and called me, and he said he saw some of the pigs or the hogs drooling at the mouth, and some of them were crippled. I said, well, that sounds like something we need to check into. So I went on down there, and I looked at them, and I says, we better call the authorities at Atlanta right now and let them send some people down here and get some samples and check this out. And sure enough, it was something like foot and mouth disease. And they had to slaughter every hog on that place and bury them. Of course, the government paid them for them. They wasn't burying them deep enough. And it was hot weather, and the hair and everything was slipping off of those hogs. They would just coming back up off the dirt. Sand, it was more sand than anything. Felt sorry for that man. And then he tried to burn that stuff, the garbage, but it was costing too much money to try to do that. But they kept tracing that virus down, and it was coming from California. A lot of that meat trimmings were on it. It hadn't been cooked, and that's where it came from. Those hogs were eating that. It was lucky that we didn't have word of that stuff spread, but we caught it in time, I think. Nobody else had it. Had lepto once, stayed in the hospital about 10 days at Warm Springs. And what happened, J.B. Anderson, what used to be, he was in the record business, had these Victrolas and whatnot. He sold those. He never did have a place to hold his cows. I think Will Copeland was with me that day, and he had a cow out there that we had to check. He never did have a chute, never did have a head gate. I had to lasso that cow, get a horse on her, pull her up to a cross tie that had a big hole in the bottom of the ground where you looked like rats had been going in and out. But we pulled the deal up to pretty close, and she got to ran, checking that cross tie, and here come a bunch of yellow jackets out, and they just covered me up. In 2 days' time, I was in the hospital. The rats had that lepto. The bees were stinging the rats, and the bees were giving it to me. That's the only way I could have gotten it. And that's old Emmett Collins told me once several times that he was afraid he was going to lose me in the hospital. But that was a close call, and I'm sure that's the way I got it.